You've always got to be open to these challenges, because unless you challenge yourself, how do you know what you're capable of? Unless you put yourself out of that comfort zone, you don't know.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who enjoyed collecting crabs in a bucket on Goodrington Beach, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 74 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate your time. I know there are plenty of other places you could be right now, and I appreciate you being here with me and listening to Running for Real. Last week, we had another Superstars episode. I hope you enjoyed that one. We had a variety of superstars from all over the world, focusing on different topics. And I really loved getting to know those everyday runners. You know, many of you say to me that you are an everyday runner and you make it seem like there's nothing you have to share. But, the episode last week was proof that your life is just as exciting as anyone else. And we all have our own story to tell. So don't put yourself down, and I hope you enjoyed that episode last week. Now, my guest today is an absolute hero, someone I could not believe that she knew who I was when we first connected. I kind of fangirled her, and she's someone I'd kind of heard of in the myths and legends way of speaking. Chrissie Wellington is such an inspiration with all that she's done, and it's not surprising that she was given an OBE, which is an Order of the British Empire. So for those of you who have not heard of an OBE before, this is what Wikipedia says, because I don't want to even try to explain it myself because I will absolutely destroy it and get it all wrong. So Wikipedia says an OBE is a British order of chivalry rewarding contributions to the arts and sciences, work with charitable and welfare organisations, and public service outside the civil service. I think you'll kind of get the gist of it. That kind of explains it in a way that I wouldn't be able to. And so either way, very impressive. Now, I didn't even get to half the questions I had for Chrissie, as there's so much I wanted to know, but I thought her story would really resonate. Even though she's a triathlete, there's a lot in here that applies to us as runners, especially the parts about expectation and pressure. We're all guilty of doing that, and I think this episode is going to help you a lot. But I want to take a moment to thank all of you who left me a rating and review on iTunes for my birthday, and those of you who shared the podcast with your family, friends, and on social media. That really helps me so much, and I'm really grateful for you doing so. So, are you ready to meet Chrissie? This podcast is sponsored by Hoka One One. Hoka One One is a running shoe unlike any other, and you're going to love it. If you haven't tried them yet, what are you waiting for? Run in their newest release, the Bondi 6. Run for any distance with a plush, soft ride. The Bondi 6 is the sweetest cushion. Thank you to Body Health for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Perfect Amino has been supporting me in my training for years now, and I need it even more now I'm trying to get back into running. I forgot how sore you get when you start running again, but at least I know I have something in my corner to help me recover. Remember, coupon code TINA10 will get you 10% off at bodyhealth.com. Chrissie, thank you so much for joining me on the Running for Real podcast. I am really thrilled to be talking to you right now, someone I've looked up to for many years, and I kind of feel a bit fangirly to even talking to you, as I've heard, numerous people over the years mention you and just following your journey. So thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a real honour, to be honest. It's been a long time coming, so I'm glad we finally make it happen.
Yeah, and this is going to be fun. And there I have, a list of so many things. I'm not even going to number them all, but I'm not going to waste my time numbering them, of how many things I want to ask you about. So I'm going to dive right in. Many people know of your journeys, and, you've been all over the world completing these incredible things. I talked a lot about that in the intro, what you were able to do. So we're going to get into that as we go. But, before we talk about that, it's not just what you've been doing as an athlete, but, just as a person, things like researching that I found about you, volunteering to help the homeless, traveling the world to Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Asia, backpacking, spending 16 months in Nepal working for the Nepalese development NGO. Like, there's so many things here that, just show what kind of a genuine and thoughtful person you are. But, I want to firstly dive in when you were in Nepal. You did a 2-week cycling trip over the Himalayas during your time off. Now, where did that kind of come from? Like, what gave you the drive to think, this is what I want to do, in a little bit of a break? Because most people, if they had a break from doing some work, they'd be like, oh, I'm just going to relax and chill. But you decided to go off cycling over the Himalayas. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, just going back to your first point, I think I see my life a little bit like a tree. Yeah. And it branches in so many wonderful ways, and some that I may never have expected or predicted, or I won't be able to anticipate happening in future. And I think it's largely due to the fact I have so many different passions, and I'm interested in so many different things, and that might be why I wear a number of different hats and have different adventures and journeys. And the time in Nepal was, just one of those. I was working for the government from the early 2000s, following one of my passions, which is international development. Mm-hmm. Ever since I was a young girl, I've just been absolutely, driven by the desire to create positive change, which is a bit trite, but that's what I've always been compelled to do. And so I made that my career. But I did get a little bit disillusioned with working at a politically high level, and I wanted to see the impacts on the ground, to really drive change at the grassroots, which is why I found myself taking a sabbatical and almost putting a pin in the map and thinking, where do I really, really want to go? And ended up in Nepal. And prior to that, I'd gone on my own little endurance sport journey from zero, and definitely not to hero, but from zero to someone that was becoming interested in endurance sports. So having graduated from university, I really wasn't sporty at all. I went traveling for 2 years, wasn't sporty. I did my MA and decided to start running, and started with 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and continued. And I was speaking to a friend, and she suggested I do the London Marathon, and she'd grown up with a heart defect, and I just thought, well, if you can do it at marathon, so can I. And so the next year, this is 2002, I found myself on the start line of the London Marathon, having trained, but not in a very knowledgeable, structured way. It was a really new activity for me, but it was a revelation, Tina, because I achieved so much more than I ever thought that I could. And I also realized that I had a passion for something, running, that I never thought I'd have. And so since that day in 2002... I
just want to pause you there. So when Chrissie's talking about this, she ran a 3:08, by the way. No big deal there.
I did. I ran a 3:08, and I think at every stage in my journey, I've realized that I'm capable of more than I think. And that was one such instance. So I started taking the running a bit more seriously. And then in 2003-04, someone suggested that I try a triathlon. And my reaction was I hadn't ridden a road bike, and it didn't really matter. I borrowed a road bike, which I still have. It's far too big for me, I've realised since. But I did a couple of sprint distances, really liked them, definitely didn't set the world alight. And it was at that point that I left and went to Nepal. So I had the triathlon fire burning, but I hadn't realised any potential in this new sport, let alone train seriously for it. So when I got to Nepal, I realized you couldn't really swim in Nepal. You'd contract some kind of devastating illness or disease if you swam in the only swimming pool in Kathmandu. Running, I could do a little bit, but I got put off because I got bitten by a rabid dog. So I decided that I would focus on cycling. Road biking, given that the roads are suboptimal, to say the least.
Yeah.
I decided to do some mountain biking. So I bought a mountain bike. And so I, through that process, got, integrated myself within the community that existed in Kathmandu that was principally Nepali Sherpas, which were the ones that were summiting, Everest and other high altitude peaks in their off season, and then, using some of the funds that they earned to buy mountain bikes and go mountain biking. So there was a great group of us, a few expats and a few Nepalis, and we used to go off in the morning. But Nepalis have lots of holidays, which is a great benefit of being living and working in Nepal. So when I wasn't working for managing water and sanitation projects, we went on these cycle adventures. So that was a very long-winded way of explaining how I came to cycle in Nepal and how I came to be cycling across the Himalayas, because there was one long holiday called Dasa, which is a family-focused holiday. And myself and a few friends decided to fly to Lhasa with our bikes and cycle the 1,400 or so kilometers back to Kathmandu over the Himalayas, all at altitude via Everest Base Camp on the north side. And at that time, it wasn't like it is now, a tarmacked or asphalted.
No.
It was a kind of potholed, bumpy, off-road experience that challenged me physically, of course, because it's at altitude, as I explained, and long distances, but it challenged me psychologically. And through that process, through cycling in those conditions, through testing myself and challenging myself in this new way, I realized that I had this capacity for endurance sports. I had a capacity to endure things, conditions, environments, etc., that I didn't know I had. And that was a revelation to me. And it wasn't training in the conventional sense in terms of split times and watches and, power. I was just going out there with my mountain bike, which was a kind of a low grade mountain bike, grinding it up and down hills with my friends, often at altitude. And so when people say to me, well, Chrissie, you came from nowhere as a triathlete, I believe that all athletes come from somewhere. They have a background, and that background shapes them psychologically and physically. So although I might have not trodden a stereotypical path to sport, I followed a path that was right for me, and I believe strengthened me and made me into the athlete that I was then to become.
And it's kind of like that whole thing of you really find out what you're made of in the middle of a challenge, like in the middle of something that's really hard and tests you, because, you kind of did these things that, like, the London Marathon and doing this cycle where you didn't know how it was going to go. You'd done some essentially training, but like you said, very unstructured. But the real test was going and doing these things. And did you take any of that kind of theory and perspective into your training? Did you always kind of keep some of that lack of expectations, lack of pacing into even your training when you were serious? Or was it difficult for you to kind of keep that, like the pressure off essentially when you were coming into a world where you wanted to be the best and you were the best? Did you feel pressure to use paces and, specific numbers at that point? Or were you able to kind of hold on to that kind of flexibility and freedom, I guess?
I think to your first point about finding out about yourself when you're in the midst of these challenges, that is 100% correct. And I will remember that as I go forward with my life. I've tried to, in that you've always got to be open to these challenges, because unless you challenge yourself, how do you know what you're capable of? Unless you put yourself out of that comfort zone, you don't know. And more to the point, I would never have known that I would have had the talents that I had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you don't try, you don't try. If I'd have never have tried a triathlon, I would never have known that it was something I would have been good at. And that's a really scary prospect. So what else haven't I tried that I might be good at? What opportunities are there in future that I could seize and really, really enjoy that I might never have known about or never known that I'd be good at or enjoy? So that's a lesson to me. And the point about technology and rawness and keeping it simple is still very, very important to me. As I became a professional, my training became more structured, necessarily. It had to become more structured, and I had to become more systematic and goal focused and strategic. I had to not only take care of swim, bike and run, which we can touch on maybe later, but all of the minutiae, rest and recovery, nutrition, strength and conditioning. So as a professional, it was my responsibility and my job to take care of every aspect of training. Training just isn't the swim, bike and run aspect. But having said that, I also wanted to retain what I guess I call the rawness, the rawness of being active. So I was an athlete that very much focused on perceived effort,
which I love.
I believe that the best and most effective computer of all is your mind. So I had to train my mind to be able to read my body and understand how it was feeling and respond to its cues. And that intuition is very, very important. And I think even if you are someone that loves to use power or heart rate, pace, or all of those things, you should also do sessions where you're kind of gadgetless, gadget naked, so that you have that opportunity just to listen to your body, listen to your breathing rate, feel your heart rate going up and down, feeling, the changes in body temperature that you do perceive if you're working hard, all of those things, feeling if you are getting a little bit sick or there's a niggle, that intuitively and you know how to respond. So I did use some technology. I used obviously a pace clock in the pool to know how fast I was swimming. I used pace on the bike, but it's not really a great an indicator of performance because the terrain means that the pace is so variable. And same with the run, I used pace for certain sessions, but for 50% of my sessions I went naked, and so in that respect I tried to retain the rawness. However, I have to admit that as training became more structured, I became more focused. I became more wedded to, the intervals and the effort I was putting out.
Was that a good thing?
It was a good thing in that I think that it did enable me to achieve sporting success, but I think it also stopped me from looking up and smelling the flowers.
Yeah, very true.
I'd go through sessions, 3-hour bike rides, and I'd get back and I'd think, wow, I didn't really see anything. I was so kind of caught up in this
kind
tunnel
of like horse with blinders on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Even my now husband, he'll say, well, did you see that by the side of the road? And I'd be like, oh no, I didn't. And I've almost crashed into cones and various other paraphernalia on my bike because I'm just so engrossed in what I'm doing, and you have to be, but also I think that it comes to the detriment of also just looking out and being at one with kind of your environment and embracing the environment. So I'd like to think, in the long-winded answer to your question, that I kept it relatively raw, relatively naked, relatively simple compared to some. But that still, there was a focus and a pressure that definitely wasn't there.
I think that's good for people to hear. Yeah, though, because, around here I call that no watch me, kind of a bit of a play on words, which we use in the community, where you can wear your Garmin, you can wear your GPS, but you're not allowed to look at it during and for all the reasons that you mentioned there. And I think it's good for people to hear that, as the level did rise up, and maybe for someone else it might be that the level you started at is their lifelong dream, or even beyond their lifelong dreams. But, relative to that, you started off able to kind of be like you said, raw, free with this expectation. And then as it got higher and closer to your potential, that's where it started to creep in. And, you've talked a lot publicly about, you doing well in the early days with no expectations. And so what would you like to say to someone listening who is maybe in that time right now where they're really working hard towards a goal, they want to be their absolute best? How do you keep that pressure off? Because being on top for so long and so many championship years, how did you manage to keep that pressure off? Because if you can do it, then other people can do it at their various levels.
Psychological strength, or training your mind, is as important as training your body. And at any level, like you said, whether you're taking your first steps or whether you're world champion, there's a pressure that's associated, especially with racing. And that pressure comes from the investment of time and energy and the desire to do your very, very best and reap the rewards of months and years of investment. And that's no different for me than it is for you or anyone else standing on a sideline. We've all invested time and energy in trying to reach our goal. It's very, very important to us. So I think I experience the same butterflies, the same nerves, the same apprehensions as anyone else. But there are strategies that you can use to try and quell some of those nerves whilst accepting that they're there and accepting that they're also beneficial, because they're a sign that you care. They're a sign that you have invested. So first and foremost, I remember that the nerves and the butterflies will fly away as soon as the gun goes off. Mm-hmm. So I will feel nervous before an event, but I know, experience tells me that those nerves will dissipate because you're so focused at the start of a triathlon and the swim and getting your head down and finding your position and, getting on the feet of someone faster than you, that you've forgotten about being nervous. You're in the race, you're in the moment, you're executing. So the nerves do go, and I try and remember that. I focus on what I have done in terms of my preparation rather than what I haven't done. It's very easy as you near a race to think, I missed that session, I wasn't very well, I don't feel well, I've got a niggle in my left leg, John or Julie next to me has done this and that and the other, or they look great and they've got a six-pack and I haven't. It's very easy to worry about what you haven't got, what you haven't done, or what other people have in relation to you. Try and focus on what you have done, what you have managed to invest. You have done the best you can in the context of your life to be on that start line. You can do no more. And I always try and remember that. In terms of kind of practical steps, visualization is really important to me. So just taking myself off, being somewhere quiet in the days preceding a race, or even try and get somewhere quiet race morning, maybe a porta potty or something. Where
that is often, isn't it? That's where you end up. I find myself sitting there going, you can do this. You're really like, that's the only place you can go sometimes.
Although it's not the most pleasant of environments. But just take yourself to a place where you can just try and do some breathing exercises, get some positive images flowing, or, even if it works for you, sit with someone and talk to someone that you really care about that can, just encourage and motivate you. I prefer to be on my own before a race, but others might like the company of other people. But before the race, it's not for race morning, but in the days preceding the race, I also visualize things that might go wrong. It sounds really negative, but I think that if I thought about them, I've got this strategy that I can deal with them. So what happens if my goggles get knocked off? Mm-hmm. What happens if I drop my nutrition? What happens if I get a cramp? What would I do to address the problem? And I think that gives me a bit of peace of mind.
Or even could you, even if you don't have to think of all the different ones, if you envision something going wrong and then you overcoming it, because we all know that those perfect races rarely happen. But if you envision something going wrong and you making it through the other side and being like, okay, well, that happened, but I'm getting on with it, and see yourself kind of successfully continuing, then it's more realistic in your mind. So
absolutely. And that includes remembering previous races. Mm-hmm. If you have done previous races, it might just be your first race. But if you've done previous races, you'll know that a race never goes perfectly. Not for me, not for anyone else. It never goes perfectly, especially not in an Ironman distance race. So think about times in training and times in a race where things haven't gone perfectly and where you've endured and where you've overcome, because that's really, really powerful. And lastly, it's very, very hard when you've invested so much, me included, but try and keep perspective. There will be races, unfortunately, where we don't reach our outcome goals, where we don't reach a time or a position that we might want. But the world doesn't end. We're still the same people. Our children, our sisters, our brothers, our mothers, our fathers, they still love us. We've still gone through the process of getting there, and that in itself is an achievement. So I always try and keep perspective.
Yeah.
And know that good days, bad days are all stepping stones. They're all kind of successes in their own way.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Tony Robbins, and he was saying you're either winning or learning, which I thought was really cool.
That's a really nice way of putting it. I'm a fan of Rudyard Kipling's poem If, and it says treat triumph and disaster as the same thing, essentially. Mm-hmm. Winning or losing, ultimately they're both learning experiences for us all. And it doesn't seem like that, and it's so cliched, but one of my most treasured victories came after a huge disappointment. And I wouldn't have had that victory had that disappointment not have happened to me.
So true. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Many of my greatest accomplishments happened after something where in the middle of it, you're like, how am I ever going to get back from this? This is the end, or this is so bad. And then it ends up bringing you something better. So let's talk about some of the good stuff within your career before we kind of move on to some deeper topics. Your first World Ironman Championships, you qualified for the first World Ironman Championships in your first Ironman, which you did in Korea. And then you went on to win the World Championship. So tell us about how that even happened. I mean, was it the no expectations? All you could do was give your best and therefore you didn't have all the pressure? Was it that, you had some kind of hints during training that, actually I could be something really special here? Like, how did that all kind of come together?
I became a professional athlete in February 2007. I was 30 years old. And it was the year before Beijing. And my thought was I'll try and qualify for the Olympics. It was a very ambitious, almost unrealistic goal. But I joined a coach and a squad with that as the intention. And I think Brett, my coach, saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. He realised that I simply wasn't a strong enough swimmer to compete with the very best at Olympic distance, but that my talents lay in Ironman. And he was the one that suggested that I race Ironman Korea. And in fact, those that know my coach know they didn't so much as suggest. He kind of ordered me, but that's by the by. He's basically, you're going to do Ironman Korea. And all I said to him was, am I ready for that? And he said yes. And I found myself on the start line there. The win at Ironman Korea was unexpected for me, but not, now I know, to Brett or to the people that I trained with. Mm-hmm. I just didn't have any benchmark. I didn't really know about Ironman. I trained with people that were Ironman athletes. I knew that I could, compare favorably with them in training, and compete's the wrong word. You don't really compete with people in training, but I was on a par with them in training. And so I could get a sense that I was a strong athlete, but I'd never raced an Ironman. And like you said, it was a total unknown. So I think that naivety was a blessing. The lack of expectation was a blessing. The fact that it was an incredibly, incredibly tough, hot, humid, difficult race was a blessing, because I thrive in those conditions, and it, enabled me to dig to depths and kind of have that war of attrition that I thrived on. Yeah. And so, yes, in answer to your question, I think it was that naivety and the sense of the unknown, which meant that I was, meant that I just went out there and raced with no pressure. But it was the same 6 weeks later going into the World Ironman Championships. The only thing that was new was that I managed to get a time trial bike. So I had a road bike at Ironman Korea, which is unheard of for a professional athlete. And I secured a time trial bike from our team sponsor and went to the World Championship 6 weeks later with my new time trial bike. But I was an unknown. I was under the radar. I was, really racing that with no expectation, other than that I personally wanted to try and get into the top 10.
Well, you definitely did that. and when
closer to the top than I thought. It at that time, the lack of pressure, the lack of expectation was a blessing. Yeah. But then in the years since, the pressure and the expectation, I think, I saw as a privilege. I saw as a positive, because it enabled me to rise to new heights.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about that in just a second. But one more thing with that race, that first World Championships. Tell us about the moment it kind of dawned on you that you could win, that this was actually happening. You mentioned your coach and family and friends kind of had an inkling or a belief that this could happen. But when did it really dawn on you, like, wow, this is really happening?
Oh, my family and friends had no clue.
Okay.
I had no family and friends on the sidelines at the World Championships. My parents were on holiday in Italy.
You're like, oh, by the way, I just won the world.
Thinking, what on earth are people thinking at home? They must be so surprised that I'm in the lead. When did I know that I'd definitely won? You never know.
Or just like, when was this like, oh my God, I could win here? Was there a moment like that?
I went into the lead about 120, 130K on the bike.
Okay.
But I definitely didn't think at that point, I think I can win this. It was more of this exhilaration that I was in the lead. My thought was, well, I'm going to enjoy every single moment of this, because I'm in the lead at the World Ironman Championships. How soon is it going to be until someone comes and catches me? Yeah. And then I was cycling along with thinking, well, this is impossible. They're going to catch me soon. They'll catch me soon. And then I'm onto the run, and I'm thinking, well, there's going to be, people that can run a lot faster. They'll catch me soon. And then, periodically through the race, a motorbike pulls up beside you and shows you a whiteboard, a large whiteboard of split times.
Are they allowed to do that?
Yeah, they do. And they're shouted on the side and shouted by people on the side as well. But the ones that the officials give you are probably a lot more accurate.
Yeah.
But and so I could see that people were not gaining ground on me. The competitors were not gaining ground on me. So I think it was in the last 10K, and because I have this ability to read my body and listen to it, I think I instinctively knew that it wasn't going to let me down. That unless someone could really up their pace, which is very, very difficult at the end of the marathon, that I wasn't going to fade enough to be overtaken.
Yeah.
I thought I might fade, but just not considerably, and significantly. So I think in the last 10K, I could finally actually think about the possibility that I might win.
Yeah. But yeah, as you say, you never can really allow yourself to think that way. I mean, I think for me, the one that comes to mind recently is the Callum Hawkins race. You never know when something like that could happen, and it's completely uncontrollable. But at the same time, you said your body so well that had to be an exciting moment. And from there, you went on to win, a lot more races, overall winning the Ironman World Championships in 2007, 8, 9, and 11. How did you manage to stay hungry when you were on the top? You kind of alluded a bit to this a few minutes ago, but for a lot of runners, when they get to the top, or anyone within their goals, they reach that level to where they wanted. And you already mentioned you were okay with kind of not the Olympic distance being your thing. How did you manage to stay hungry and keep pushing yourself to higher levels rather than becoming complacent with it?
Because unlike many athletes, it was so new to me. Many athletes, especially nowadays, are growing up with triathlon. It's a fantastic thing. They've been doing it since they were young, but you might find that by the time they're 35, they're burnt out. Whereas in my early 30s, I'm just reaching my, I'm just starting my career. So it was all very new. So I was told by my coaches and my peers that there was so much more that I had to give. Mm-hmm. And I felt it. I felt that there was much more inside me in terms of getting stronger and getting faster. And so that the desire to reach potential, which is kind of a nebulous thing, drove me and motivated me. I was also compelled by this desire to build my platform.
Yeah.
I realized very early on that through my sporting achievements, I'd have the platform to drive positive change so that I could basically connect my two passions. So it was almost like triathlon was giving me the voice that I hadn't had before, giving me, power and influence, which if used correctly can really be a force for good. So, I'm under no illusions that I'm not a, Serena Williams or a Billie Jean King, but at the same time, within the triathlon fraternity, you can, use your platform to convey messages and have that influence and drive change. So that really inspired me. It really, really inspired me and drove me forward. And lastly, I think, I only know, having retired, that I was searching for something that I then found. And when I found it, that's when I knew that I could retire. So I was searching for something as a professional athlete that I didn't even know I was searching for until I found it, if that makes sense.
Yep. So will you go on to tell us what that was?
It was the race that was so utterly imperfect that it was perfect. And that just sounds like a total paradox. But I always thought my perfect race in triathlon would be where nothing went wrong, where I just felt that I executed swim, bike and run almost perfectly or perfectly. That kind of happened at Roth in 2011. There were, few little downs, but for the most part, it was a wonderful, wonderful race I was very, very proud of. And breaking the world record was something that I would, remember and treasure forever. But it still wasn't the perfect race. And it wasn't until I had that perfect, imperfect race that I realised that's what I was searching for. And it was the race where I had to dig to depths that I didn't know I could dig to physically and psychologically. Where I had that race with my competitors that I'd always craved, where they brought out the very, very best in me, where I had to fight and not race from the front, but come, from a significant distance behind to win. And in that race, through that race, I think I proved to myself that I was a fighter and that I was worthy of being a world champion. That was my definition of being a champion, was how much can you endure? How deep can you dig? How much can you fight? And I answered my question. And I knew that no matter what happened in the future, no matter how faster I might or might not get, nothing could come close to that exhilaration and satisfaction from that race.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to put it in another context. I'm not sure. Are you a fan of the Rocky films?
I've not seen them.
Oh, the amount of people that haven't seen them, I want to show the world. But my listeners know I love Rocky films. But those of you who do know the Rocky films know that in the third one, he just kind of goes around winning everything. Easy, knockdown, knockdown, knockdown. His ego is kind of coming up. Not that yours did, but he's kind of feeling that this is comfortable. But then it's only when he fights Ivan Drago in number 4 where he, comes against and is really tested in everything that he's got and that he finally is able to kind of feel like he is what he deserves. And I hate fighting, I hate boxing, but for me though, I just love the stories behind those films. So it kind of reminded me a bit of that for those who know about that. And I want to, I want to make sure there's so many other things I want to get to. So for anyone else listening, I'm going to tell you about Chrissie's book in a minute so that you can go read about her story because she has so much more to share about it. But, I want to talk about, how hard was the decision to retire for you? And then, an article in the Telegraph has kind of talked about, your biggest battle has been with eating disorders. So I want to get on to talk about that, but tell us about the decision to retire first, and then we'll go on in a minute.
The decision to retire was easy and hard. Again, a bit of a paradox. It was easy in that I just knew. Yeah. You can write lists of pros and cons till, the cows come home. But sometimes you just have to look within. Yep. And I knew. I try and make decisions based on, I'll put it another way. So if I make a decision, I think about how that makes me feel, and then I know instinctively whether it's the right decision. So should I race or not? And I think about, should I pull out of a race? if I think, right, I'm going to pull out of that race, right, that's what you're going to do. I think about how that makes me feel, and then I know whether it's the right decision, and then I can act on it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Oh, so yeah.
I think about, right, I'm retiring. You're retiring, Chrissie. Right, how does that make you feel? And you know what? It made me feel excited and liberated. Yeah. And I knew that then it was the right decision. But it's not an easy process. Mm-hmm. It's really hard. And look, these are first world problems. I had the privilege of being a selfish, self-absorbed professional athlete that could focus her life on achieving her goals. So don't get me wrong, it's not woe is me. But that said, your identity, your lifestyle, the structure of your life, everything is focused on achieving that goal. And you don't have the self-validation that comes from training and racing. You don't have the financial security that comes from, good performances that pay relatively well, or sponsors. You don't have the structure in terms of my day looks like this because I'm swim, biking and running, and then I'm resting. Mm-hmm. So you have to find alternative goals. You have to find something to structure your life around. You have to find new passions. You have to find out who you are and what you're good at. You have to find alternative sources of income. We had to decide, myself and my now husband, where we wanted to live. We were living in Boulder because that was, where we trained. Did we want to live there? We didn't think so. So we had to make all of these decisions that are almost made for you as a professional athlete, or that you don't have to think too much about. So the process was difficult, but I am fortunate also to have had a life before triathlon. Yeah. And I would encourage anyone that sees their future in professional sport to also pursue other interests, to learn a language, to go to university, to, learn a new skill. Just have interests that transcend the sport, because there will be a time when the sport isn't the axis around which your life revolves.
So true.
And so I looked back at my life before triathlon, which was rich and varied and satisfying and fulfilling. And I had friends that loved me no matter what. And I had skills and qualifications that I could use. And I knew that I was passionate about international development. So I had a career path. And I also knew that I had a platform through sport that was a real privilege. So I had these opportunities that I tried to focus on. But yes, at times it was very hard, and it was a process of physical and psychological weaning off the addiction that is full-time, 4, 5, 6 hours a day of training, physical training, and then resting, but to doing 3 hours. That became my norm for the next year, and then the next year maybe 2.5, then the next year 2, and now I'm at a stage where if I do an hour a day, that's great, and I'm happy with that. If I think back to 7 years ago, would I be content with only doing an hour a day? Oh no, my addiction to physical exercise at the volume that I was doing wouldn't have allowed me to do that. So it was a weaning process that may never leave me, but it certainly was the right step for me to retire, and I didn't really question it.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think often we do know in our hearts what the answer is. It might not be the answer we want, but in decisions like that, the answer. We can ask every single person we know and care about what we should do. But at the end of the day, it's not their decision. We are the only ones that really can answer it. And we often know the answer, which is why we keep asking other people, hoping that, maybe they'll give
validate
us
it.
Yeah, exactly. So I totally understand what you mean. And a lot of what you were saying, I heard my own story in that with the decision to stop running, to start a family. And on that note, I wanted to kind of ask you, you do have your daughter, Esme, and I mentioned a few minutes ago about having a battle with eating disorder. Now, you and I have connected partly because of the amenorrhea journey, and being a mother was something you wanted. So tell us about what kind of happened after you retired. Did the eating disorder, you mentioned a minute ago, the exercise addiction, how did that kind of play into things once you didn't have that structure and the success that the competing in the Ironman triathlons was bringing you?
Yeah, the eating disorder was at its height before I found or realised my passion for running. So that was before my early teenage years and my early 20s. An obsession with body image, with trying to be thin, the desire to control, my setting of arbitrary but very important targets and goals about what I could and couldn't eat. And it got to the point that I was very, very unwell, and my periods stopped. I started growing, kind of downy hair on my body. Yeah. But it was also coincided with me finding running. And I'm very interested in the physiological side of training, and I like to read around it and understand various training philosophies and the different facets of training, and obviously nutrition is one. And as I started to read around the sport at that time of running, and then speak to other people, I got a few injuries, which also, made me realize that I needed to look at other aspects of my training to try and make sure that everything was, in line with my goal of fulfilling my potential. So I looked more deeply at nutrition and realized that in order to be able to succeed in running, I needed to fuel myself differently. And it wasn't like a light bulb went off, but it was a slow process of, all right, I'll just try, as hard as it was, as hard and difficult and stressful as it was, I'll eat a little something before I do this run, or after this run, I will fuel and see how I feel the next day. And it was almost an N=1 kind of piece of research. It was, how does food make me feel? And I tested it on myself. And I realized, oh yes, actually, eating for performance is enabling me to perform. Mm-hmm. And that catalyzed the process of recovery for me. Okay. And so although my training volume increased, the intensity increased, I did also simultaneously increase my calorie intake, although I don't believe that everything is necessarily should be, or that everything should be focused on calorie intake. But I increased the volume of foods. I ate what I think is a balanced, healthy diet that fueled my performance. Mm-hmm. On retiring, I know that those disordered kind of eating behaviors started to come back. Yeah. As you reduce the volume and simultaneously kind of look at what you're eating again, the temptation is then to really restrict the eating. And there's that really difficult relationship that is so perpetuated in the media of exercise and food, you can only eat if you've exercised.
Yes.
And you can exercise in order to burn off the donut or the chocolate bar or whatever. So it's this really prevalent but quite damaging message.
Yeah.
And I was internalizing it. Well, you can only eat if you've done X amount of exercise a day. And I started again to restrict food, hormonal disruption. And at that time, I'd retired. Tom and I wanted to look at starting a family. And I knew that if I really wanted to give us the best possible chance of starting a family, I needed to take ownership of this issue.
Yep.
And reduce the volume of my training, but also make sure that I was eating for performance, and not performance in terms of becoming world champion, but performance in terms of conception.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it.
And so, for a year or so, my focus became on creating a body that was capable of conceiving.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was really difficult.
Yeah. Oh, I get you there.
Really, really, really difficult.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, after a long process, we did, and now we're really, really blessed to have our daughter.
Yeah.
And
she's coming up to 3 now.
She's 2.5, going on 20. At the moment, it's a wonderful age, but she really, she's such a phenomenal little girl, and I'm so proud to be her mum, and we're so proud to be her parents, and so privileged to be able to have a role in bringing her up to achieve what she wants.
Absolutely.
What she wants to.
Following all those passions, right?
I hope so. I hope so. Maybe not necessarily swim, bike and run, but her passions.
Yeah. What you said at the beginning.
Going back to what we were talking about, it certainly hasn't been an easy journey. And I certainly have to be very, very careful not to slip back into unhealthy behaviors. And now being a parent, I'm so mindful of not ever wanting to impart my disordered practices on Esme. I would never want her to think that mummy doesn't eat what daddy and I eat, or mummy won't eat this or won't eat that.
Yep.
And that's really, really important. So we're not her only role models, but at this stage in her life, very important role models. And we can be role models in terms of physical activity and having a life that goes beyond being a parent. I think that's very important. So demonstrating to her that mummy and daddy do run, we do go on a bike, we do go to work, but we also love her.
Yeah.
And also being a role model in terms of our behaviors, and that includes food and nutrition. So I think being a parent has been life-changing in many ways, and is enabling me to still grow and learn, and ultimately go from being the selfish, self-absorbed athlete to being someone that hopefully is a lot more understanding and aware of the impact that she might have on others.
I hear you. That's exactly how I feel right now. And just one more thing before we wrap up here. What would you say to someone who is right in the thick of it right now? They know they have to maybe reduce their exercise. They know they might have to gain weight. They know that, like you said, they have to focus on performing for a different reason when they've done it their whole life to be for sport, but now it is for conceiving. What would be your best advice to someone who is right in there right now?
focus on your goal. If you're goal orientated and you've been an athlete, you're used to focusing on your goal, and your goal is to create the best home for an embryo and a baby that you can possibly create. And that goal doesn't end there. And hopefully ends with having a child in your arms. And hopefully, if you can focus on that goal and also get the support of those around you. It's not an easy process, but there are professionals that can support you in that journey and provide medical interventions if that's what's necessary. And there's absolutely no shame in needing those.
Yeah.
If you do to conceive, but also friends and family, because it is a difficult process if you're overcoming challenges, especially mental health challenges, and having the support of those around you that can, lift you up when, you're struggling is really, really, really important too.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure people can read up a lot more about you if that is something that you are going through right now. Now, just one last thing I wanted to touch on. I will mention your books in a minute, just before we get on to the final four. But, you're working at Parkrun as the global lead for health and well-being. Just for the listeners, tell them, what does that mean? What is your job at Parkrun?
So I'll explain just a little bit about Parkrun for those that don't know.
Yeah.
So
Parkrun is on, so I will put the link to the founder of Parkrun in the show notes for anyone who wants to listen. But sorry,
fabulous.
Continue.
Yeah, I'd actually listened to that that podcast too. He's always incredibly inspiring to listen to. Parkrun is a non-profit organisation that delivers free weekly 5K events in the UK, but in 20 plus countries around
expanding
the world. Now in over 20 countries. We also have in the UK junior parkruns, which are weekly 2K events on a Sunday, for 4 to 14-year-olds and their families. So in the UK we have about 550 5K events at the moment. There'll be more next weekend. Yeah. It grows every week, and about 230 junior parkruns. So in across the world, we're about 1,500 5K events, and they really are open to all. You just register once and bring your barcode down to any event, but they're free to take part in. There as a social opportunity as much as they are a chance to walk or run around a 5K. And if you don't want to walk or run, you can volunteer or simply come and spectate. And in the UK, we have about 140,000 people taking part every weekend.
Amazing, yeah.
Well over 200,000 across the world every weekend, which is phenomenal. So my role is to try and increase participation in our event by people that might not otherwise participate in physical activity. So less active people, those from more deprived backgrounds, those with long-term conditions, minority ethnic groups, for example. So those that are less well represented across all typical physical activity interventions. So that's my role, and I'm just absolutely passionate about it because I can combine the kind of development angle and my passion for sport and for physical activity. So it's a really wonderful opportunity for me professionally to really drive change in a very, very meaningful, tangible, impactful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will put links in the show notes for people to find out more about Parkrun. And again, I urge you to listen to that episode with Paul Sinton-Hewitt to learn more about it, just in general. Now, just to wrap up here, Chrissie, you do have a new book out called To the Finish Line, which I love so much. I love the layout more than possibly any other book I've seen in the way that you broke it down. You know, you have questions from fans that you've answered. You've broken your advice down by the sports. different areas of learning, insight from your coach, actionable things to do, your secrets, recipes. It's just kind of an all-in-one everything book. So just kind of for someone listening, why should they buy this book to the finish line?
Well, the genesis of the book was, I guess, because I realized that my autobiography, which I published in 2012, whilst it was hopefully really inspirational and motivational, didn't really have a lot of tangible, practical training advice. And people were coming to me, whether that was at, conferences or expos or events or via email or social media, asking me for training tips, not just in triathlon, but in a range of endurance sports and other sports. And I thought, well, I have a wealth of information and understanding that I really, really want to share with people. Why don't I put it all down on paper? And so the process started. I didn't really realize how much I was biting off. Definitely more than I could chew. But that's how To the Finish Line was born. So it is a guide for being the best athlete you can be, whether that's in triathlon or otherwise. It does have, like you said, chapters on swim, bike and run, but it also has chapters on nutrition, sports psychology, race preparation, strength and conditioning, rest and recovery. So the whole spectrum of training for performance. So I tried to write it from my own perspective, given that I'm not a sports physiologist, I'm not a coach. So everything is informed by my experiences or my conversations with various experts in that field, but it's written very, very much for the lay person. So it's not an academic, like a dry academic book. It's quite light-hearted. There's a lot of imagery and pictures and kind of pull-out boxes and case studies and anecdotes and examples to kind of give life to the text. So hopefully I've succeeded in my aim of making it accessible for anyone, especially, beginner or professional athlete. And hopefully people will enjoy it and we'll get something out of it.
Yeah, I definitely think people will. And I really enjoyed reading it. Like I said, you guys listening, it's just the way it's broken up. It's really refreshing, kind of more than any other book I've seen. So I think you'll really enjoy it. And there'll be lots of links in the show notes for you to get yourself a copy. All right, Chrissie, we're just going to take a second to thank our sponsors and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. This podcast is sponsored by Hoka One One. Hoka One One is a running shoe unlike any other. Run in their newest release, the Bondi 6. It is a running shoe with a marshmallow soft cushion and marshmallow lightweight. In the 6th edition, the Bondi has refined Meta Rocker technology to give you a smoother, more balanced ride. It is shockingly lightweight for how much cushion it packs, and the Bondi 6 will give you maximum comfort in every mile. I know you think it's too late to start thinking about a new shoe for your upcoming races this season, but actually it isn't. I wore my Hoka One Ones for an hour the first time I put them on, and they felt great. The Bondi was one of the first shoes Hoka created, and it's become a fan favorite for good reason. Just try it on today and experience the sweetest cushion. Get yours today by visiting hokaoneone.com/runningforreal with the number 4. And use promo code RUNNINGFORREAL, again with the number 4, for free expedited shipping and become part of the family. It's time to fly. By now, you've heard me talking about how much I love Body Health Perfect Amino for recovery. But did you know that if you try it and don't like it, you can get your money back? 100% of it. That's how confident they are in what they are making and how much it will help you to recover. And hopefully by now, you know how much I appreciate it. Especially as I'm trying to get back to running after having a baby, and let's just say things break down a little bit easier than they did before, so I definitely need them to help me stay healthy. Perfect Amino is made of the 8 essential amino acids our bodies need them to function. And this will help it kind of work as it should be. And as a vegan-sourced, non-GMO, gluten-free, soy and dairy-free product, you don't have to worry about food allergies affecting your ability to recover. So with marathon season fast approaching, give yourself the best chance of getting to that start line healthy as those intense workouts and accumulated miles begin to take their toll. Remember, you can use coupon code TINA10 to get 10% off at bodyhealth.com. What do you have to lose? All right, Chrissie, just 4 more quick questions for you. Starting with, I have a question on, tell me about a photo that may have been online somewhere, maybe on a social media account, maybe just showing a moment in time that wasn't quite the full story. So it didn't show everything that was going on in that picture.
Can I look at it like in a macro level?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I think the photo of me finishing my last professional race showed a smiling, exhilarated, happy person. And that's what you hope a finish line photo will be. Mm-hmm. But as we spoke about before, that doesn't necessarily show all the difficult, hard, challenging, nervous times that underlay it. So people think that I found racing easy.
Yeah.
And that I was always successful. And that simply wasn't the case. For every fantastic finish line photo of any professional athlete, there is a world of pain, of discomfort, of disappointment, of self-doubt that underpins that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, really important to remember.
That's so true. And it's interesting you say that, because Jared Ward, who I had on the show a few weeks ago, said the exact same thing, that the same photo he gets shared around of him qualifying for the Olympic team is the photo that everyone uses. But he sent a different photo which says this actually represents what I was going through at that moment, which was taken a few seconds before that one. So really cool that you kind of thought of the same thing. So, and very true. Obviously, he proves your point right there. What about a running for real moment, a moment that people will only get if they're a runner?
I'm sure you've had a lot of stories that relate to kind of toilet.
Yeah, I was going to say, I knew you were going to say that.
Activities. It's definitely the case for me. And it's been exacerbated since becoming a mum. So I think being a running mum means that, you know, there are some aspects of your body that simply might not be the same ever again. And, you know, there are plenty of runs that I've come back with wee dribbling down my leg because I simply haven't been able to hold it even in time to get to my nearest bush, let alone get to the toilet. But, you know, whilst you don't want those things to happen, I actually don't mind. I'm a woman, I'm a parent, I'm a mum that sometimes doesn't have a lot of bladder control.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, because that is very, very true, very real.
That's my reality.
No, and I think that's such a common thing, and I think I actually experienced that for the first time a few weeks ago. But I have been working with a pelvic floor therapist, so I'm hoping that that's one of the last times I'll experience it. But definitely is very, very common within women who are postpartum. So thank you for showing that you are yet another real person with us. What about a high moment in your career?
Achieving more than I ever felt possible in my last professional race.
Love that. Cool. Thank you so much. And finally, what do you tell yourself on the start line? Be the best that you can possibly be for every moment of this race. Love that. That's so cool. All right, Chrissie, where can people find out more about you? I will put links in the show notes to the books, to the finish line, and your autobiography, Life Without Limits. But where can they find you online if they want to? Oh, Tina, I'm so technologically inept. I
haven't got a Facebook page. Someone set up a Facebook page in my name about 10 years ago, but I've never seen it. I have my own.
You do use Twitter though, don't you?
Personal one, yeah. So I use Twitter.
Okay.
It's Chrissie Smiles.
Like that.
CHRISSIE.
Yep.
And then Smiles. So I'm quite prolific on Twitter. So you'll find me on there. I haven't yet signed up to Instagram, but I keep being told that I need to do that. I also have an antiquated website which gives some details about me and especially my professional career, but also some blogs about development if people are interested in that aspect. So that's chrissiewellington.org, and obviously my autobiography, Life Without Limits, which is available, and To the Finish Line, which we also mentioned.
Yeah, cool. And just to mention another reason you should get on Instagram, there is a Chrissie Wellington hashtag, which has nearly 2,000 pictures in it. So you definitely have a need there. So people are obviously interested in you. So I think we should start the campaign for getting you on Instagram. And
oh, wow.
And you kind of made for it the way you talk about, having a platform, or Instagram could be another platform for you. But Chrissie, thank you so much for sharing with us today, for being real, being honest, and just kind of, letting us see into your life and learn from you. So thank you so much for all that you've shared today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Chrissie was really real with us, which, although I wish she hadn't been through those hard times, it helped to show us that even the best of the best struggle with body image issues and, the expectation and pressure. I loved her advice for dealing with pre-race nerves, and hopefully you can maybe use that in the future as you're preparing for your race, maybe even at a parkrun. You can find links to everything we talked about today in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 74. 74! Wow, we are getting closing in on 100 now, which is exciting. If you're enjoying these episodes, I will ask you, please consider sharing them with your friends and family on your Facebook, on your social media. That helps me to get new listeners and also gives you something to discuss with your friends in your running groups. Now, I really appreciate those shares. Thank you so much to anyone who has done that in the past. Oh, and on that note, if you want to find me on social media, you can follow me on Strava. You can just type in my name. Instagram at TinaMuir88, the number 88. Twitter at Tina Muir, and facebook.com/real Tina Muir. You can also join the superstars I mentioned last week. We got to meet some of them. You can find that at tinamuir.com/superstars. Now, next week, I have physical therapist and one of the world leading experts for biomechanics, Rich Willey. We're going to discuss changing your running forms and if it is even worth it, and what mistakes we as runners make that keep getting us in trouble over and over again. Tune in next week to hear more from this guy, and he gives talks all over the world, so we are very lucky to have him. Hope you have a great week. I'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.